This is episode number 239 with the incredible plein air and landscape master, Don Demers.
This is the Plein Air Podcast with Rhoads, publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine. In the Plein Air Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called plein air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Rhoads.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the Plein Air Podcast. I'm Eric, and I am so excited. I'm reinvigorated. So last Saturday, we ended Watercolor Live, our international conference about watercolor. It was 4 days. It had a first day, which is a beginner's day, which we've now renamed to Essentials Day. But it started with that day and then 3 solid days and long days, like 8 or 12-hour days. They were long days. And we had like 30 top watercolor masters, everybody really great that you can imagine. And we had 31 countries attending, thousands of people attending, and every state in America attending. And that was really, really cool. The best part about it, though, is not just the watercolor education. It is the life-changing transformations that were taking place. You could see people would post their work. Oftentimes they'd paint along or they'd paint the picture that someone else was, a master was teaching. You could see at the beginning of the week how their work was. And then by the end of the week, you could see the same people, how their work had dramatically improved. I mean, dramatically. And it's because all of these little tips and techniques and ideas got implanted into their brains. It got implanted into mine too. I'm really excited about it. I am not primarily a watercolorist, but it's something I'm doing more of than ever. And because I've been watching, and I can't watch the whole thing because I'm host and there's stuff going on behind the scenes in the background. But I'm even seeing personal improvement, so I'm excited about that. And I have not done much plein air watercolor yet. I've done a little. I did quite a bit in New Zealand, as a matter of fact. I did oil, and then if I needed to kill another quick hour or something, I'd do a watercolor, and I had some really good ones. I'm really happy with. So anyway, might give it a try, but it was really a lot of fun. So Sunday after church, Sunday was my day off because I was done with Watercolor Live. And after church, I really wanted to go painting, but I was just so exhausted. I think I went back to bed or laid down or something. Didn't do any painting at all. But last night, I was able to get out into my studio anyway. I didn't get any plein air painting. And by the way, here in Austin, we're having an ice storm. I think most of America is getting it. And so no plein air painting for me today. But anyway, I'm working on this 30 by 40 piece that I did in the Adirondacks from a study. And I'm getting ready to send it off to the gallery. I put it away for a couple of weeks. I'm working on it again. I see some flaws. Then I'll put it away for a couple more weeks and work on it again. And hopefully it'll be kind of ready to go. And I'm excited about that. Speaking of excited, man, it's always nice when you get recognition, right? You work hard, you get recognition. We are humbled to announce that we're number one in the FeedSpot list of painting podcasts for a second year in a row. Thank you for that. Thank you for listening to the Plein Air Podcast. It's like 90 countries, 120 countries that listen. We've had millions of downloads. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. Thank you for that. Our next big online conference is perfect for you. It's perfect for you because if you have not yet learned about the plein air lifestyle, maybe you're listening to this, but you haven't gone outdoors to paint, it is different. it's different than painting indoors. Now, color mixing's the same and things like that. But, when you're painting outdoors, you're dealing with a lot of other things and you got to learn how to deal with them outdoors. I like the idea of learning to paint first indoors and then going outdoors because it just makes it a little easier. But the event coming up in March is Plein Air Live. It's an online conference. There will be thousands of people attending from around the world, 30 top instructors, and it's kind of like spring training for painters. Now, the Plein Air Convention coming up is also that, but spring training for people who can't make it to the Plein Air Convention. And it's 3 days plus Essentials Day, and you can learn so much. And that's coming up at pleinairlive.com. Make sure you check that out. And you can attend from anywhere. You can watch in the comfort of your home, no matter where you are. We actually had people in other countries sitting up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning because they were so excited to be there live, because there's something about being on live when you can, because you get that interaction with everybody. You get to ask questions of the faculty members in the chat. You get to chat with people, you get the breakout rooms. Everybody made a lot of friends. As a matter of fact, I was putting people together. Like, I found people that lived in the same area, but they didn't know each other and they needed people to paint with. So I'd put them all on a Zoom call together and get them acquainted. And I did that a few times. That was kind of fun. Speaking of fun, Plein Air Convention, it's going to be fun. And you probably heard this already, but we announced that Jane Seymour, the actress, Golden Globe winning, has committed to come to the Plein Air Convention. We decided it would be fun to do something different this year because we're celebrating our 10th year. So we're going to do some stuff. I've got a planning meeting later today. As a matter of fact, we're going to come up with some birthday stuff. And it'll be a good year to come. If you're going to come in a year, come this year, especially because we're going to be in Denver. We're going to be painting around Colorado, some of the most incredible places in the world. And we all paint together every day, but we also learn together. We have 5 stages, and those 5 stages will allow you to, if you don't like one stage, you can go to another. We have a watercolor stage. We have a pastel stage. We have a main stage, which is all the main speakers and all the mostly oil painting, although we do have some watercolor. Alvaro Casanet is going to be on the main stage this year because he's such a big deal. And then we have all these other stages. We have a couple stages we call demo stages, which is just different kinds of demos going on all the time. And people are setting up in the halls and painting portraits, and they're in the expo hall buying art materials at deep discounts, and they're partying and having a lot of fun. It's a ball. And if you could ever make it, it'd be great. Nothing like being in person. Okay, anyway, come out and see it. It's going to be a lot of fun. Today, my guest is Don Demers. Don and I have known each other for, probably at least 20 years, maybe longer. He's a brilliant painter. He was born in 1956 in a small rural community of Lundberg, Massachusetts. He had an interest in painting marine subjects at an early age. He spent his summers on the coast of Maine near Boothbay Harbor. It's where he lives now, part of the time anyway. After finishing high school art programs, he furthered his education in the School of Worcester Art Museum in Worcester, Mass., and then the Mass College of Fine Art in Boston. His maritime experience came about as crew members aboard a traditional sailing vessel, many, I guess, including schooners and square riggers, and continues to be an avid sailor. And as you know, or maybe you don't know, people who paint ships know the rigging, right? And people who buy paintings of people who paint ships, they know that if the rigging is wrong. And so I think that's really important. Don's really a terrific guy, a great human being, really, really, really sweet, friendly, giving, generous, wants to help other people. Now, this is a little unusual today because the podcast, I had the chance to record him in our soundstage on the set when he was here filming a new video, which is going to be coming out soon. He's also got one out now called Mastering a Nautical Scene that you can get at painttube.tv. But we took advantage of that time in the studio together. So we just sat down in the chairs in the studio and did the interview there. So for those of you who are watching, we're not on the set of the Plein Air Podcast at the moment, but it's the same content. It's just a different set. Let's get to that right now. Our guest today on the Plein Air Podcast is Don Demers. Don, welcome to the Plein Air Podcast.
Thanks so much, Eric. It is great to be here and to be with you again.
Now, I'm trying to think about when we first met, and I'm not sure. It was back east somewhere, and it may have been at a workshop or something the Plein Air Painters of America put on.
Gosh, I wish I could remember exactly when it occurred. It was a while. It was 20 years ago.
Yeah, at least.
It was some time ago.
Yeah.
I became a member of Plein Air Painters of America around 2004, somewhere in there. I honestly don't remember. I do remember being with Plein Air Painters of America in Mount Desert up in Acadia with you. We had a good week up there.
Maybe that's where we really got to know each other.
We got to know each other there. We'd met prior to that. I was in Monterey with you at the second convention, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
With John Stobart.
Classic.
Yeah.
What a classic.
That was fun.
Well, you have had a really terrific career, and I want to kind of dig into that. But let's first go back to the very, very beginning, because I like to understand the roots. I recently read something that psychiatrists say that pretty much anything that happens before you're 10 years old kind of determines your track in life, or at least how you interpret the world or your lens. Tell me a little bit about growing up and where you grew up and when you kind of first started thinking about art.
By the way, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome.
It's very flattering and humbling when you're asked about your life and what you're doing with it. So I'm very appreciative of that, and I want to thank you for it. I grew up in central Massachusetts in a farm town in a big old white farmhouse. My dad was a bricklayer and had 4 brothers. So it was a rough and tumble household. We got to go on vacation to Booth Bay Harbor, Maine for 2 weeks every summer because my grandparents had a little cottage up there. And I started drawing when I was so young, I barely remember it, but I do remember this. My mother and father had an in-home office, basically a desk and a filing cabinet. My mom kept the books for my dad's masonry business. And I used to sneak in there and steal the paper and even envelopes to do drawings on. And I remember my mother and my father both scolding me. Donnie, that's not what that paper's for. So I just started drawing. It was kind of a second language for me. I had some inexplicable want and need to draw things. And of course, I was a little kid, so they were jet planes and trains and trucks and superheroes and monsters and all that kind of stuff that from being in the early 60s, anything that was inspiring me from the television or from comic books. Oh, the Batmobile I drew many times from every angle, all that stuff. So it was always just part of my way of communicating. And it never occurred to me not to do it. And it wasn't long before I was 8 or 9 or 10 years old, and my family referred to me, oh, Donnie, he's the artist. So it just stuck.
So that's kind of how your how would they say that? That became your self-worth, or it gave you confidence. You identified as an artist at that
Very
point.
much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. It was something that my other brothers couldn't do. And of course, we all played sports. We beat each other up. We built tree houses. We ran through the woods and the orchards and all that. So I did all of that with them, but that was my thing.
And was there farming involved? You said you lived on in a farmhouse.
There were apple orchards everywhere. We didn't operate one, but there was one across the street, and there was one just down the road a little bit. So we volunteered to every harvest season. Everybody in the neighborhood, we all picked apples. The teenagers got to use the ladders. Runts like me had to pick the drops off the ground and put them in the wooden boxes. And my father drove a big trailer truck, and everybody lined them up. And it was fun. It was a great way to grow up.
What a great childhood.
It was. It was wonderful, wonderful.
So what happened? How did your art progress? You go into school, high school. Did you take art classes or anything like that?
Well, there was something that happened prior to that, and that was my mom was an amateur painter, and my Aunt Jean, her sister, was also an amateur painter, but they were good, my aunt particularly. She still paints. She's 92, and she's still painting away.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, it's great. And so I was around the oil paints. And so I saw the materials. I remember a big coffee table book that came, my aunt had it, of Andrew Wyeth paintings. And that was that. And I started to stare at that. And because we were in Boothbay in the summer, I was very young. I don't remember exactly what age, 10-ish, somewhere in there. And went to the Farnsworth. My aunt took me there. And I saw Wyeth paintings for the first time, and that planted the seed. And then when I was in the 6th grade, I was given a paint by number. I'm not boring you with this, but paint by number for Christmas from some aunt that I can't even remember who it was. And it was of 2 Cocker Spaniels, and I couldn't wait to get that thing done. And then I thought, well, that looks kind of stupid. I'm going to blend the edges. So so I turned it into a much more realistic picture just by blending the edges from the spaces. And then I had a lot of paint left over. So I put the Cocker Spaniels aside and I painted a seascape.
Really? Still have that painting?
It may be in the attic of the old house because my youngest brother still lives in the house. It might be up there somewhere. Right. So I was just oriented toward the materials, the tools.
Well, you need to get that because it's going to go in the Smithsonian someday.
Maybe in some pet museum somewhere. So then, yes, high school. And I had the greatest benefit of having an absolutely wonderful high school art teacher. Her name was Neldy Drum, and she was a taskmaster. And I spent every spare minute in, I was either shooting street hockey balls in the gymnasium with my brothers because we all played ice hockey, or I was in the art room. And I spent an inordinate amount of time with her in there. And
were you kind of like the star student because you had a lot of experience drawing?
I worked the hardest. I loved it the most. I was in there constantly. So I had a key to the art room. I bought the supplies for the high school art program, and she stuck up for me and stood by my side and gave me pretty much free rein through my 4 years of high school.
And what do you think you remember what you were doing? Were you painting? Were you doing a little bit of everything?
I was kind of a snob. You know, you had to do some jewelry classes and some sculpture activities to fulfill the requirements of the class, and I just look at Mrs. Drum. She said, just go paint. So she said, I know you don't want to do those other things. Just do what you're interested in doing. So I was painting outside. I was doing outdoor landscape
work. You were, really?
Yeah, I'd go up behind the high school into the woods and paint. And I also did a lot of still lives, some work from photographs, you know, peeling stuff out of National Geographic and all that kind of thing, and doing figures in the paintings and anything I could get my hands on. Oh, a lot of sporting art, a lot of hockey scenes.
So that's interesting that you went outdoors. Was this an idea that you had on your own, or had you seen an example of somebody going outdoors that gave you the idea? You know,
not that I recall.
Pictures of Monet or something?
Nope, I just did it on my own. Yeah. I loved being outside. We grew up with German Shepherds, and my one favorite German Shepherd was Marco. And so I take my paint box and I take Marco and we go into the woods for the whole day. And I still have some of those paintings.
Do you?
Yeah. And I just set up. I was a very contemplative kid. Part of me was active and social and gregarious, but I had a very contemplative side to me. I wanted to be by myself. And I'd go out into those woods and set up my paint box, and Marco would run around and sit by my side, and I'd paint. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, lots of that.
So you learned the lesson of outdoor painting at a young age. You know, this is an issue that I have. There's not a right or wrong, but you know, there are people who have spent their entire life painting from photographs or painting in the studio, and never have gone outside to paint in the light.
Yeah.
And that changes everything.
Everything changes. Absolutely everything changes. There's such a barrier, and I don't want to criticize or diminish anyone who chooses to work from photography. The beautiful thing about the creative endeavors is every one of them is custom fit to whoever that person is. But I became aware of the fact that, you know, we're multi-sensory beings, and we're binocular, and we're bipeds, and we live in a spherical world. And we're walking into that world with all of these influences and as I was saying in my recent video, that people look at the sea and they think of waves. Well, what they're missing is the fact that it's an invisible energy source that has a frequency and an oscillation that's moving the water. At the same time, we walk outside, there's sound waves and light waves that are coming at us. There's energy coming to us. And if you experience it in its full dimension by being in it, it completely changes your perceptions.
See, I've never heard it articulated in that way. I never really thought about that. But it, the essence of what you're saying is so important because, and of course I experienced it, and of course I published Plein Air magazine, which is all about going outdoors. But the idea of capturing that essence, that vibration of light, and also the senses, everything's about a sensory experience, and to have the wind blowing and the birds singing and the dogs barking or whatever, it just all informs kind of the essence of the scene.
It absolutely does. In the summertime, when you hear that cricket chirping, any of that is affecting your fingertips.
Yeah.
And it's coming in here, your two intelligence centers, your heart and your mind. And it's traveling down there, it's informing it. And I've said to my students, if they're working from photographs, be careful of that, because that's like kissing through a screen door. You're damn close, but you're not there. You just have that little obstruction that's keeping you from being in the full thing.
That's a really great analogy. Well, that's kind of interesting to think about that. I never could articulate the difference between a photograph and painting outdoors, but you just said it perfectly.
Thanks. Well, I've done both. As an illustrator, I had to rely on photography.
Yeah.
And if you have a sense of, if you can cultivate a sense of your own presence, boy, you can feel it.
Yeah.
It's just so different when you're outside with the full experience instead of a truncated or an abbreviated experience. Yeah.
So you go to high school, you're the star pupil. What happens then?
I won the high school art award. I got $600.
Wow.
That was a big deal.
Wow.
It was a big deal in 1974.
1974.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's $600 is a lot of
It
money.
meant a lot. That was a lot of gasoline for my Impala.
You had an Impala.
1966.
I had a 68 Impala. Have that in common.
Yeah, a 306. Got me around being cool.
I get it. So, so you win the $600. You are now empowered. You now have this extra bolt of confidence. What happens?
I went to art school in Worcester, Massachusetts, the School of the Worcester Art Museum. The best thing about that school was it was physically and institutionally linked to the Worcester Art Museum, which is a wonderful museum, exceptional collection for a museum of that size. And it didn't go well. The culture of art education at that time was to be socially conscious, conceptual, avant-garde. There was no craft taught, or very little. I was not happy at all.
The schools at that time were almost anti-craft.
Absolutely. I was actually told by one of my instructors in front of the class, well, we have someone in the class who is handicapped. And I knew he was speaking about me because I had just had a consultation with him the day before, and he was quite specific about it. So he saw me as being pretty inadequate and actually flawed because I was interested in classic portrayal.
That's interesting because I had a very similar experience. I didn't start painting till I was 40, but my wife bought me an art lesson at the local art center, and I went in, and the guy is saying, just express yourself, throw the paint on the canvas. And I said, well, can you teach me? I want to learn like how to paint a bottle or a flower or something. And he said, oh, nobody does that anymore.
Yeah.
That's been done.
Yeah. I faced the exact same thing. It was made worse because the cast of instructors that I faced had their own personal agendas. So they were trying to make you a minion or an acolyte of what they were doing instead of recognizing your individuality. So I didn't last very long in that school. I lasted a year and a half. I did get to play some college hockey, which was great because they were associated with Clark University. So I played college hockey for Clark. And then I had a little interim time. And then I ended up at the Massachusetts College of Art as a painting major. I was a triple major. I worked very hard, very hard.
What were your majors?
Painting, illustration, and graphic design.
Oh, my.
And I fought that faculty like crazy to allow me to have all. I said, I'll do the work if you let me do it. And again, I sound like I'm being a little bit too negative here, but the administration said, you can't be a painting and an illustration major. They have nothing to do with each other. So even then, by then, I knew who Rockwell was and who Dean Cornwell was and who N.C. Wyeth was. So
well, let's talk about that because there was, when I first started publishing Fine Art Connoisseur, somebody said to me, well, don't ever cover somebody like Rockwell. And I said, why? And they said, well, he's not a fine artist, he's an illustrator.
yeah,
But he was a fine artist.
of course.
So where did this all come from?
Well, if they want to go all the way back, they can say that Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci were illustrators because they were being told what to paint.
Yeah.
That's what an illustrator is.
Yeah, I guess that's a really good point. So it's really, but you can tell. We talked at dinner last night about me going to a Cornwell and Rockwell exhibit, and those guys could paint circles around anybody.
Absolutely.
You know, the subject matter was commercialized, for a cover of a magazine or something, but they were really fine painters.
Brilliant painters.
Yeah.
And my opinion of painting is it is not an art, it is a craft. It can become an art if the practitioner is sufficiently qualified.
So what's the difference?
There isn't one. If I had to give a difference, it would be, well, of course, illustration embodies a wide variety of media. You could work in airbrush and pen and ink and mixed media and all that. So that can convolute the definition, but really the only distinction between illustration and, quote, fine art is that in illustration, you're being directed and instructed by an exterior source. In fine art, in its essence, you're by yourself and you come up with your own ideas.
See, I thought you were talking about the difference between, there's a difference between being a proficient painter and being an artist.
Well, I am. So the difference, let me clarify. To become, I consider artist to be a level of achievement, almost a ranking, if you will.
Yeah.
There are days when I've been an artist. There are days when I've been a picture maker. And there's a difference.
So how do you know when you're an artist versus when you're a picture maker?
Yeah, you can spot it when you're involved in it and when you're finished. When I am surprised by what it is I've accomplished, those are the days I'm an artist.
Yeah.
When I already know the outcome at the beginning of the day, then I'm filling up a canvas. But to be clear, I consider painting to be a craft. And when you're accomplished enough at your craft, it gives you the opportunity to create art. That gives you the platform. The difference between being a painter and an illustrator, a separate question, is that as an illustrator, somebody else is giving you your motivation.
Yeah.
When you're a quote, fine artist.
Well, to some extent, somebody in that, even in that environment, to some extent, there's this essence or the sense that somebody is giving you that, because if you're making your living, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I have to sell this. Mm-hmm. And so that influences the way you, or can influence the way that you paint. Because
absolutely.
Especially if you're desperate to make a living, I have someone in my family who's an artist who has never sold a piece, has never wanted to sell a piece, and is afraid to sell a piece because he doesn't want it to influence his art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you ask very insightful, poignant questions and pose positions that are really have been omnipresent in my consciousness for the last 40-something years that I've been doing this. There's a difference between being a painter and making a living as a painter, and the criteria changes. And our dear friend Joe McGurl, he and I have talked about this because we're such dear friends, and our kids grew up together. And we always talked about the fact that we're making a living doing this. And some people will agree with what I'm about to say, and some people will be ashamed of me for what I'm about to say. But there are internal motives and external motives. And if you've got the discipline to compartmentalize those two and recognize them and to what degree they're influencing you, you can rest well at night. And you can paint paintings that are not designed for an audience, but that you may know will have a greater appeal.
So what's the difference? Is the difference, that's good enough, send it off to sell it?
No, it's subject matter. It's never quality of paint. The quality of paint has to be high every time you do it.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Because, but you know, if one is a machine, you know, trying to generate revenue, one could say, well, you know, it's good enough, I can send it out the door. From my perspective, it's like, I can't send it out the door.
Yeah.
It's not, there's something wrong with it, it's not right yet.
As far as the integrity of the craft, that was never once compromised by me. And
Never once?
No. Well, if perhaps it was, but it was unintentional. It was by mistake. I was too tired, or I missed something, and that kind of thing.
So you never had a gallery say to you, you know, we could sell those sailboat paintings all day long, you know, the ones sitting next to the little red barn. Could you do me 30 of those? You would never do that.
Oh, no. What I'm talking about is the quality of the craft.
The quality, okay.
The quality of the craft was never compromised.
All right.
If I wanted to do a painting of an old abandoned cement truck versus a catboat sailing through a marsh, when my kids were little and I had a mortgage to pay, I painted the catboat sailing through the marsh.
Beats cleaning toilets.
It does beat cleaning toilets. And
Not that there's anything wrong
no,
with
there isn't. And I think it was Hawthorne, or one of the great American existentialists, simply said there's honor in work.
Yeah.
And I always had that tenet in my mind. And it just so happened I love sailboats and I love marshes, so it wasn't a big deal for me.
Yeah, and you're painting.
And I'm painting.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be a bad day if you're painting,
It was not.
even if you're painting badly.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, did I paint for a market? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love the subject, but my works were greedily consumed by a market down in Cape Cod and Connecticut, and I was just so fortunate that I happen to love sailing ships, and I love the water, and I love the shoreline. And there was an audience waiting for those pictures,
Well,
so I was just
you know,
lucky.
And that's very worthy. It's very noble in the sense that you're doing something that people love. They want to own it. They want to hang it on their walls and look at it every day. What can be wrong with that?
I didn't really see a negative.
Yeah.
Any negatives I got were from some colleagues or acquaintances that I had that thought that I was a sellout or I wasn't a purist or any of that. And I said, listen, I'm doing what I want to do, and I'm raising kids. So poke at me if you want, but it's not bugging me.
So you mentioned purist, so I'm going to go down this road. Because I publish Plein Air magazine, I will hear from people who say, a plein air painting is not pure unless it's been done outdoors only. A plein air painting is not pure if it's done in more than one session. You know, it can't even be a good painting if it's done from a photograph. You know, you hear a lot of these ideas that people have about what's right or what's wrong.
Yeah.
Does any of that matter?
To me, no.
Yeah.
And so now we can't talk about religion, politics, or plein air painting.
We can talk about religion. You want to go there?
Sure.
All right. So, well, from my perspective, the goal is to do a beautiful piece of artwork.
Yes.
And, Bouguereau back in the French Academy was using photographs. I bet he did beautiful paintings.
Yeah. Yep.
And I would imagine there's been a lot of photographs used over the years, but it's about knowing the craft and knowing what to do and how to do it right.
So Theodore Robinson, Albert Bierstadt, Thomas Eakins. Photography was present in all of their studios. So my personal position is that if the work has been inspired and motivated by being outside, on location, and you're dedicated to that experience, I don't really need to dissect it any further than that. I practice and teach observation and invention. Those two things go together. Visual veracity. You have to develop your observation skills to the point where you can really see accurately outdoors. And you've got a craft that will follow suit. So that you've got the skill to say, I know what this looked like out here. I know what this is. Then you have the freedom and also the obligation to have your artistic intellect and your artistic intuition and instinct influence what it is you've seen. That's the inventive part. That inventive part can be back in your studio.
Yeah.
And that inventive part can have the aid of a photograph.
But that inventive part can also be moving a tree to make a better composition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you're given, with freedom comes responsibility. We've all heard that. So that certainly applies to painting. So you have to know your craft, and you have to have your point of view and your perceptions. So the only time I really think that I would be a purist is, and I've participated in a number of them, the plein air events, the competitions. You know, so working outside all day, you're given a host family or a hotel room. Going back in your room, to me, and tweaking a little edge here and finessing the thing a little bit, I don't consider that to be illegitimate.
No, as a matter of fact, we talked earlier before we started the interview about getting away from your work. You know,
Yes.
that you got to have some perspective. If you can put a piece of work down for 2 weeks and then look at it again, you're going to see it completely differently. When you're working on something intensely for 2, 3, 4 hours outdoors, you can't see it anymore.
No, you can't.
And
Yeah.
also, you can't see if your values are right because you're outdoors. You get it indoors, and you might see, oh, you know, the sky needs to be, you know, it's too bright or too dark or something, or just tweaking it. So I don't see anything wrong with that either.
Yeah, I say, you know, you take the 5 days of a competition and gather it together so that it's one event and say, okay, I'm here with my equipment. I just got off a plane and I got 4 days to do this stuff.
Yeah.
Look at the event in its entirety and what can I do this week? You know, what you don't want to do is start snapping pictures like crazy and putting them up on your monitor and working on your paintings at night in your hotel room. That's not cool.
Yeah.
But everybody has to live according to their own conscience.
That's right.
But to have the reconsideration of passages in a painting that you just worked your tail off, you know, on 2 or 3 paintings that day, back in the room to say, oh yeah, that is perfectly legitimate practice. And to further that conversation, I obviously focus on landscape, seascape, marine work, although go into any museum and who can't be captivated by brilliant figure work and portraiture and all that. But let's stay focused on landscape painting. You pick any museum on the planet. I've been to many, not nearly enough. You look at those landscape paintings, they were not done in one session. And
Yeah.
you know, you look at Emil Carlson's landscapes. I mean, they're just so genius. They're so poetic. The names could go on and on and on and on. The old Lime School. You look at Redfield. Look at Willard Metcalf. You know, anywhere you go, that work is considered and reconsidered and addressed in a studio. So.
Well, and you know, these guys that you mentioned, they get some incredible texture that can only come from layering.
Absolutely.
And or glazing, or they're managing to get some darks in the crevices between the brush strokes that, you know, just make it come alive.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That patina that gets built with scumbling and layer after layer after layer, it's just so many painters we could pull out. I mean, Joe McGurl does it a lot, you know, that layering and layering that he gets, and then wiping out a layer and letting those darks stay in the crevices, just as you described. Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned a number of artists. You mentioned Theodore Robinson, who does not get a lot of notice or credit.
Yeah.
You know, most people don't even know who he is. He studied with Monet. He was one of the people who supposedly brought plein air painting back to America. Although I think plein air painting was taking place, I think that, you know, the Hudson River guys were doing some sketching on location, but they probably weren't doing much paint. Although I think Durand, he had a magazine called The Crayon.
Yeah, right. I haven't heard that in a long time.
I think he talked about he had servants that helped him get his studio easel and his stuff to the top of a hill up in the Catskills or Adirondacks or something. And he talked about grinding his pigments on location. So he did do some painting on location.
Yeah.
But is there somebody out there that you really love, that really inspired you, that is not the ones that we hear about all the time? You know, we always hear about Sargent and Sorolla, Zorn, and, you know, those heroes.
Yep.
Are there any heroes that you have that people might not know?
Perhaps there are indeed. In the field sketches, by the way, of Thomas Hill.
Oh.
Wow. He was a different personality in the studio, but if you look at his field work, it was so poetic, so simple, so straightforward. No adornments, just beautiful truth in his work. Frederick Church's field studies were that way. But I can bring up a couple of names. James Smiley. He was a post-impressionist, brilliant painter. His brother George Smiley was an etcher, so he used to take his brother's paintings and translate them into etchings for newspapers and magazines. Worthington Whitridge. Oh, The Road to the Sea, what a painting. William Lamb Picknell, absolutely brilliant, brilliant landscape painter. Studied in Europe, worked extensively in New England. Where else can I go? Montchamblant. If I can't spell his name, I shouldn't use it in the interview. I saw his work at the gallery, at the museum in Stockton, California.
The
Hagen. Just knocked me over. But now we'll go, these names are probably well known, but an artist that absolutely, utterly changed my life, Dennis Miller Bunker and Arthur Streeton.
Really? Why Streeton?
Well, I'll tell you when first.
Okay.
I was with Joe McGurl and Bill Davis. The three of us were the three amigos there for a while, painting together constantly. And we got caught in a deluge of rain in Connecticut, so we went to the Hartford Athenaeum, and there was an exhibition of American painters and Australian painters together. And the American painters were the one that you expected to see. Sanford Gifford, Kensett, the whole group. I mean, not to diminish them. They were my heroes,
right,
and studied them. But I turned a corner, and there was an Arthur Streeton painting, 5 feet square or so. And it literally took the air out of my chest. I couldn't believe that sight. It pushed me backwards. And it was a painting of a river valley in an arid Australian heat. And I just couldn't take my eyes off it. It was alive. It was an animate object. And it was so beautifully, and this is a funny word, but contemporarily done. It looked like it had been painted that day. It had a modern look to it. And it did away with all the superfluous. It exalted all the essential. And it said everything the landscape painting needs to say. And I just couldn't believe it. And McCubbins was in that show, and a lot of the other Australian painters, and I was just dumbstruck by that.
And we don't even see them in America.
No, you can't see this stuff here.
As you know, I had a book in the world famous artist cabin where you stayed on the Australian painters. Spectacular.
We poured over that.
Spectacular.
In the evenings we had here.
So, how do you interpret these influences into your own work? You know, you mentioned several, but Are you, when you're painting, are you thinking about, this is something that I learned from this artist or that artist, or is it just kind of that all of it informs who you have become?
Yeah, it's the latter.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I was so heavily in. Well, by the way, I'm not nearly my favorite painter. I'm so much more. I want to have some self-respect here. I'm just so inspired by some painters that I see that I want to invite their influence into my process, into my work. So it is the latter. I'm very fortunate. I was not a particularly good student, except for a couple of topics. And two of my favorite topics on earth are boats and painting. So if it's something that I've been presented with or exposed to, it sticks.
Yeah.
So I've got a pretty good running Rolodex of images of paintings by Picknell, and when Metcalf, I'd throw his name in there. And so as I'm painting, I am reminded of their paintings that I've seen.
Right,
so
when you see a problem, you go, oh, you're recalling something.
Yep, absolutely.
From somebody.
Yep, and it's, I used to, when I was younger, less mature as a painter, I had more to prove to myself. So I was actually a little bit restrictive according to my doctrine and my method. Even though I still work in what some people can say, I hate to say tight or detailed. That gets assigned to me a lot, and I don't care for it. My paintings have a lot of information in them because, as Andrew Wyeth said, one of my all-time heroes, he said, I want to wring it out like a sponge. I remember seeing that in the film of him, and I loved the way he twisted his hands. And that's what I do. I don't want to abbreviate anything. Right. I love to be fully satiated when I'm finished with a subject.
We're living in a very interesting time. There are more high-quality painters alive today than any time in history. Mm-hmm. And that may be an overstatement, because there may be lots of them that we didn't know about that were painting that never got any notoriety. But because of, in America, because of the plein air movement, mm-hmm. We have developed some statistics that we don't know if are completely accurate, but there are 150, 200,000 people painting in plein air in America.
Good heavens.
Now, a lot of them are Sunday painters or hobbyists, mm-hmm. and nothing wrong with that.
All are welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the quality of work, and maybe it's because, maybe it was there, but we're seeing it because we can see it on Instagram or Facebook. I am just blown away by the quality. There are the people like you, like McGurl, who are the leaders. You have become almost the senior senators, if you will, of our.
I go along with the senior part.
Yeah, I get that. But people are looking up to you guys. But I'm seeing 20-year-olds that are knocking it out of the park. That it blows me away. The only thing that I wish we could figure out how to do is to get more people seeing art in person. Yeah. Because when you're looking at a painting on Instagram, you can't see the little crevices of paint and the way the light's hitting it, from natural light and so on, and it's so different. And that's one thing I don't know how to change. But it is a really interesting time. Do you have any idea why that is? Why we're having this resurgence of such great painters?
I could sort of walk through it a little bit. I would say, at the risk of sounding a bit fawning, you've been a big part of it. The way you've opened up the venue of landscape painting to people, that it's available. It's accessible. It's not just a passive activity, it's a lifestyle. There are a lot of dimensions to it. There's a community of colleagues and friends and acquaintances. There's a network of destinations. There's a lot of components in what you've created, and it should be recognized and honored and celebrated. So that is part of it.
Thank you. I didn't create it. The plein air painters.
Well, you had a pretty good part in it.
The plein air painters of America created it.
I should say we. I am one of them. We were there at the beginning, the burgeoning stages of celebrating
the
that.
resurgence.
The resurgence of it, yeah, and the revitalization of the act. So that's one component. There are a lot more people on the planet now, so just by numbers of practitioners, there's a big part of it that I simply don't know. The resurgence, the presentation of ateliers and the traditional forms of study, that wasn't around when I was in my teens and 20s.
No, it wasn't even around when I started the magazines. There were basically 3 or 4 big ateliers, and now there are 400 of them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because students bred students who bred students.
Yes, exactly. So I think that propagation of that exponential growth of it, exactly what you just described, I think is probably the primary answer to it. The ratio between audience and practitioner used to be audience is here and practitioner is here. Now it's like that.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because I was talking to some folks from one of the big Plein Air events, and they said, this is an event back east that has a lot of people attending for 10, 20 years. And they said, we have noticed that the people who would attend year after year after year after year have now become painters.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So that's a great example of the audience has become the entertainer, if you will. I
had this old grouch friend of mine.
You have friends?
Yeah. Let's use the term loosely, shall we?
Okay.
But undoubtedly a card-carrying grouch. And he said, why you teaching all these people to paint? They're just going to grow up to compete with you. I said, I'm not living with that much fear, all right? And so what if they do?
Well, you have to live with a spirit of abundance.
Yes, all boats rise with the tide.
That's right.
Yeah, don't be stingy about anything, about your knowledge, about your energy, about your commitment, about your dedication to others, and don't protect things, don't covet things. There's no need to be proprietary about anything in life, but especially in our profession.
So what is your best advice, somebody watching this who is an artist or a beginner artist, and they're just trying to figure it all out. They're trying to figure out, how do I start? How do I get better? What would you say to them?
Yeah, a few things. And I've loved that this has been posed by people in interviews in the past. What would you say to a 12-year-old Don Demers, or what would you say to a 16-year-old Don Demers? I don't like speaking in the third person because famous athletes do it all the time. I find it obnoxious, but well, what I share with my students when I have them is that we don't necessarily have to answer the question of why we want to do this. That's inexplicable. I personally, for me, think that, I don't want to get too esoteric here, but for me, my work, because I did it so intuitively as a young boy, it gave me a sense of connection. Once you were a separate entity on this earth, I think we can have a degree of homesickness because we're not in communion with the universe. And so it was a vehicle for me to overcome my homesickness. So that's my most profound, if you will.
You are very profound.
Definition of why I do what I do. It's a vehicle from which I can alleviate my homesickness, my separation. So you don't have to overthink why you do it. But from a practical standpoint, it's the how and the why we do this. Love the how. Love your tools. Love your pencils, your crayons, your oil paints, your paper.
I can't get enough of that stuff.
I can't get enough of that stuff.
Just keep buying it all.
You do, and have that be your private world. I mean, as I've said to people, plein air painting is doing the most private thing you can think of in a public place.
Yeah.
And that's a big leap. You got people buzzing around you, and you're trying to be private and solitary. So just love the materials and love the process of it. And if and when you can, have your motives be internal, not external. Don't hide your paper because somebody can see it. Your drawing's not coming out so well. Just try to have the internal confidence to be dedicated to yourself in your work. And ask yourself questions all the time. What is it I want to draw or paint, and why, to some degree? But have your own internal world. And when you're comfortable and when you want to, then you make the choice of presenting it publicly. Show it to somebody. We all want to. That's where we put frames on the stuff and walk them across the threshold out into the public. But so back to the practicality, don't expect miracles, don't expect shortcuts, don't expect tricks, don't expect any of that stuff. There's no magic brush, magic paint, and just simply accept the fact that you're going to do it wrong a lot of times before you do it right.
Embrace the struggle.
Embrace the struggle. Most everything I know about painting, I know because I've done it wrong way too many times, until I finally said, oh, that's it. I landed the plane in the woods one time, then I landed the plane on the building, and finally I hit the runway.
So you're driving down the road, you got your easel in the trunk, you're looking for something that inspires you so you can pull over and do a quick study.
Yep.
You see something, you slam on the brakes, you get out. What do you do next?
Change your mind and stop looking at it as identifiable objects. We have this duality. It's like being in Harry Potter's world, where there are muggles and there are mortals, or whatever those definitions were, and we coexist. There's an artistic world that is suspended upon the prosaic world. And we see it, in the prosaic world, we see it as a bus, a building, a tree, a parking lot, a hill, a mountain. In the artistic world, we see it as a light, a shadow, a pattern, a rhythm, a texture. You change your mind, you change your dialect and start speaking in another language. You start speaking in artistry instead of familiarity. And that's what will open up a painting.
Really? Never heard it.
That makes a trash can a worthy subject.
I've often thought a great workshop exercise would be to take everybody to a back alley and say, okay, you can't step more than 50 feet from here.
Excellent.
Find something to paint and make it beautiful.
That's it. And I remember Clyde Aspavig saying when he first started that he would get in the car and drive for miles and miles and miles, and he'd come back at the end of the day. I think, yeah, I'm certain it was Clyde that said this. Clyde, forgive me if I have some inaccuracies here. And he'd come back and not have made a painting. But once his eyes opened, and I always thought a great name for a kid show would be Made You Look. Because once you look, you never look back.
Yeah.
The world changes. So he said, now I can walk into my backyard and see clothes on a clothesline or a pile of laundry or something, and there's a painting right there.
Yeah.
Sorolla taught us that. That painting by Sargent, I wish I could remember the title of it. It's in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. It's his painting friend sitting at one end of the bed, and the bed's all unmade, and the sheets are all in a big pile. You know, some people, oh, that's a chore. I got to go wash those sheets. It wasn't a Sargent.
Well, Wyeth did the same thing.
Yep, all the time. Just
every day, made beauty out of everyday
prosaic
objects.
to profound. That's what. So that's my motive when I pull over. And I was the same. I've spent my summers on the coast of Maine, and I used to walk around and not be able to see a painting. Like, what happened?
So what, 100, 150, 300, 500 years from now, assuming you're not around.
I am on a strong vitamin regimen.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
What would you hope? What would you hope that people think about you or know about you that is important for you to share to them?
That I was able to recognize beauty in the world. I was a dedicated observer to the world. I celebrated the places I found that I thought that exalted beauty. So I think I said beauty 3 times. And I mean it literally, and I mean it figuratively as well. That I had a certain filter in my perceptions as I wandered around on this world of things that manifest an aesthetic. And also, I think about this now all the time, I'm interested in the poignant balance between humans and the land they live on. And that red house there, it's very humble. It's very beautiful in its proportions. It doesn't mean to be, it just is. I don't think the people that built that were heavily weighed by architectural design. And where it's positioned on that shore, where it has a relationship to the water, there's a humble elegance in those simple things. And I find myself seeking those subjects out all the time. It's one of the reasons I love sailing vessels. They're a symbol of this beautiful symbiosis between a human-made object and how it can utilize natural forces and how gracious it is in its presence there. So those would be the themes I'd like them to look at.
Well, Don, thank you so much for being on the Plein Air Podcast.
It has been my honor and pleasure to be with you, both as friends and as colleagues. And I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to share my thoughts and ideas with you and with the audience.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you, Don. That was fabulous. I just can't say enough good things about you. You're such a great guy, and I'm looking forward to spending some time with you maybe this summer. Maybe come up and go painting in the Adirondacks, or I'll come up to Booth Bay. Okay. Are you guys ready to improve your art sales for 2023? This is going to be a great year. You may hear all this stuff about the economy. It's going to be a great year, but it's up to you. You have to make it a great year. So it's time for the Marketing Minute.
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Art Marketing Minute, my goal is to answer your art marketing questions. You can send them in or upload a video question, artmarketing.com/questions, or you can email it to me, eric@artmarketing.com. Most people email them. And my producer, Amadine, who is French, has the questions for us. Amadine?
The first question is from TJ Pruitt from Virginia. If your primary purpose with your art is not monetizing, how best do you showcase art that you want to reach people but are not primarily concerned in selling? For me, I enjoy when my art brings joy to others, so I want to give it the best possible exposure for that cause.
All right, TJ, I'm going to tell you a story. Great question. I hold these week-long retreats. I do one in the Adirondacks every June, although I think I'm going to stop doing it pretty soon because this summer will be like the 12th one, and I'm kind of sick of doing it. I want to go somewhere different. I don't know if I'll stop or not, but I might. Anyway, I hold these retreats. I do another one at Fall Color Week. And one time we did Fall Color Week in Kananaskis Park, Banff, Lake Louise in Canada. And we had an unseasonably early snow and a massive snowstorm. And a lot of people didn't want to go out. So we were painting out, looking out the windows and painting indoors. Some of us went out and painted part of the time. But I offered some personal coaching to people because I teach marketing. And a bunch of people took me up on it. And this one guy wanted some time. And we started talking about him wanting to sell his art. And he was asking how to do it. And I could sense that his heart wasn't really into it. So I just said, why do you want to sell your art? And he said, well, I guess because I thought I was supposed to. And I said, well, there's no supposed to. Why do you really want to sell art? He says, I don't know. I said, do you need the money? He says, no, I don't need the money. I retired, had a great job. I don't need the money. I said, then why do you want to sell your art? He says, well, I guess I don't really want to sell it. He says, and what we finally figured out is I asked him a bunch of questions, and we figured out that his need was that he wanted to contribute somehow. He wanted some recognition for his art. It's always nice to be validated that somebody else likes your art, which is not always the case. Sometimes I'll give a painting to a family member and they'll go, oh, thanks, with gritted teeth. Because, art's a personal thing. Sometimes, they're not going to like it. So we crafted a plan for him to market his art, but not to sell it. At the end, we determined that he wanted to leverage his art to help organizations and charities that he loved. So we worked on a plan to get him involved in those charities and auctions. And we find ways to help his art help others. And he was on fire with a mission. Now, I go into a lot of that stuff in my book. There's a lot of different things you can do to get involved, but essentially, if your charity's local, then you need to become famous locally. And you have to follow a marketing plan to become famous locally because they want your art, and your art will raise more money. If you're putting a piece of uh, garbage art into an auction, it's not going to sell. That's going to be embarrassing. So you got to be good. You got to make sure that you're living up to it, and I did that one time when I wasn't very good. I put a piece of art in a auction for the kids' elementary school, and nobody bought it. And so that just reflected badly on me. So, and now I'm really, really careful. I had a moment one time, it was a really great moment when I had this great big painting. I did it just because I loved it. It was one of my better ones at the time. And I just gave it to this charity auction. And it ended up, it was the number one fundraiser for that auction. They had me stand up, they're holding it up, and I got a lot of recognition. It was kind of cool. And at the same time, the charity made a lot of money. So that was really the goal. So find a cause or two. And there's no rule about a painting has to make you money. Painting is about bringing you joy. Most people don't start painting because they want to make a living becoming a painter. Most people want to paint because they love painting. They want to get good at it. And then a lot of them say, I kind of like to make a living at it. And a lot of that goes back to the recognition, but a lot of it is about, hey, I don't want to work in this crummy job anymore. I'd rather paint all day. And if I can paint and make my living, that's even better. So you might consider, depending on the quality of your work, to explore leaving a few select pieces to some select museums. You might not get into the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the LA or Chicago museums, but unless you're really already famous, and even then, probably not. But there's hundreds of small local community museums that need art and art donations, and I'm actually working on a lifetime plan to build a museum of plein air and of realism, because those are two areas that I'm really, really, really excited about. All I need is somebody with a lot of money to fund it. I need a building in a major city, and I have all the art, and some of the art I need to get yet. But anyway, that's the kind of thing you can do is donate art. Um, and you have to put some stipulations. Whenever you donate anything, you got to put stipulations. Now, there's a guy by the name of Alphonse Mucha, great painter, was really known for his Art Nouveau work, but he was a brilliant painter. He did this thing, this series of paintings called the Czech epic or the Slav epic or something like that. And I've seen them, but they have been in hiding because he gave them to the city of Budapest and said that they must show them, but he never said when or how long. So they sat in a warehouse for 100 years before they were shown. Now they're starting to get shown a little bit, but you want to make sure you stipulate, here's what to do. You can't sell my paintings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Next question, Amandine.
The next question is from Eugene from Hawaii. Does striving for titles from one's peer group create unnecessary stress? Does it distract from the essence and joy of painting for pleasure? Are there any benefit to a title? What are the negatives? I see people spending a lot of money chasing the dream of a title.
Now, Eugene, because you didn't specify what kind of title, I'm going to have to guess. I'm not sure what you mean by titles. I can think of a couple of things. One is to have a title in a local art club, like president or treasurer, but I don't think that's what you mean. Um, I think what you probably mean is a title from an organization. For instance, there's one called the Oil Painters of America. There's the one called the American Impressionist Society. There's lots of them. If you mean a title from one of those, let's explore the pros and cons. Now, these titles are typically not political. They can be, but usually not. You get them from winning a certain number of awards annually. And if you win a certain number of awards annually in so many years in a row, and you get to accumulate a certain number of awards, that adds up to getting voted in and getting a title. Oftentimes it's a master title or a signature member title. And that way you can sign your paintings with that master title. So for instance, for the Oil Painters of America, OPA, you sign your painting, Eric Rhoads, comma, OPAM or OPM. And the idea is that you are an OPA master, right? And so that means you've earned that title. Now, there is prestige to that, huge prestige among painters who know how hard you work to get there. And they know that the standard is high, that you don't get those awards and win those awards by putting together crummy paintings. You get a good standard. But you have to enter a lot of paintings until you get to the point where you've elevated yourself. Now, among some collectors and some galleries, that is also very prestigious. So that's a pretty big deal. So keep that in mind. Now, the reality is there are big names out there, brilliant masters who we all know and love, who don't have any titles. And there are some who have them, but they don't use them. It just depends on what you want to do. The process of getting a title takes a lot of commitment and time, and hopefully it elevates your standard of work. And when you don't win, you learn, you grow, you try harder next time, and you keep trying more and more to win. Now, competitions of any kind make you stronger. In our own plein air salon competition, which is monthly, by the way, it's not, by the way, it's also not all plein air. It's all kinds of painting, portraits, figures, everything. But because it's sponsored by Plein Air Magazine, that's why it's called that. But anyway, I've seen the quality increase over the years because the people who enter get better and better and better and better and better. And so, and by the way, there are top artists who enter, there are new artists who enter, there are new artists who win, there are top artists who win. There's no rhyme or reason, but when you compete, you get better. And the same is true when you enter these organizations. If you're a member, first you got to belong. California Art Club does this too. I don't think they have titles, so I'm not sure. Anyway, I've never tried to get a title. I'm not so sure that I have the time to try to get a title because it's not really all that important to me, but I don't have to make my living selling my work. And I think I could make a living selling my work without a title, but it might become important at some point in my life if I ever decide to paint full time or something, which I don't think I'll do, but you never know. We all have to make our own art journey about our own goals, our own interests, our own time, not somebody else's desires for us. I paint because I love to paint. You probably paint because you love to paint. I don't send the galleries a lot of work because I don't do a lot of work. I don't want the pressure. I turn down shows because I don't want the pressure of creating shows. I just want to paint. I want to have fun. And if I get some good ones, I'll send them off to the galleries. I don't even care if they sell, but they do sometimes, and sometimes they don't. If I were making my living full time, I would care a lot more, right? But I make my living publishing art magazines and conferences and things like that. So it's not about that. I love that I can just paint without pressure. And that might be you. You might want to just paint without pressure. Nothing else matters to me. I don't need awards. I don't need titles. I don't care what happens. I just want to paint because I enjoy it. And and I like to paint so I can hang out with my friends, and I want to be good enough so that I don't completely embarrass myself. But do what you want to do. Follow what you want to do. Don't follow a Pied Piper. All right, that is today's Art Marketing Minute.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
And I also want to remind you to join me at Plein Air Live coming up in March, pleinairlive.com. Join me at the Plein Air Convention. It's pleinairconvention.com, which is coming up in May. And if you're not already a subscriber to Plein Air Magazine, man, you will love it. You really will love it. I know I'm not being humble about that, but I hear so many people just say they can't wait. Some people have had it for 10 years. They just can't wait for it to come in. I hope that would be the case for you. And if you don't love it, you can cancel, but nobody ever does. Well, there was that one guy one time. All right. If you've not seen my blog where I talk about art and life and stuff and things, it's called Sunday Coffee. You can get it for free weekly at coffeewitheric.com. We got a big audience on that. I don't know how many, but I know it's big. People keep forwarding it. That's nice. Also, I'm on the air daily on Facebook. The show is called Art School Live, where hundreds of artists do demonstrations and talks, one every day, 5 days a week. I'm on noon Eastern every weekday. mostly live, sometimes replay. You can subscribe on YouTube by searching Streamline Art and hit the subscribe button. Also, please follow me, Eric Rhoads, on Instagram and Facebook. And by the way, I don't have it here to show you, but I got my Instagram, not my Instagram, I got my YouTube plaque designating they've got 100,000 followers. That's a pretty big deal for me. It's a plaque, you know, it hangs up somewhere and gets dust, but it's kind of nice to get recognition. Anyway, it's a great thing to see a lot of people get something out of it. Anyway, I'm Eric Rhoads. I'm the publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine, among others. Thank you for tuning in today. And remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. Bye-bye.
This has been the Plein Air Podcast with Plein Air Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.